She taught piano for 50 years. Then her final student did something no one expected. Everyone in town knew the sound of her piano. On quiet afternoons, when the wind carried just right, the notes floated down Maple Street like a memory, soft, slow, and steady. People paused at stop signs and smiled when they heard it. Children pointed. Parents nodded. It was just part of the town, like the diner on Main or the church bell that rang on Sundays. And behind that music was always the same woman, Mrs. Adler. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. She had lived in the same small white house for almost her entire life. A neat garden in the front, lace curtains in the windows, and a brass door knocker shaped like a treble clef. Her piano room sat right at the front of the house, with large windows that let in the morning light. The room was warm, filled with worn sheet music, a ticking metronome, and a single upright piano that had outlived its warranty by decades. For over 50 years, Mrs. Adler had taught piano there. Children came with sticky fingers and scuffed shoes, some excited, others clearly forced by their parents. But she welcomed them all the same way, with a calm smile and a patient voice. "Let's begin," she'd say, never needing to raise her tone. There was something about her that made even the most restless child sit still. Maybe it was the way she looked at you, like you were capable of more than you thought. Or maybe it was just the steadiness in her hands as they moved across the keys. She never had children of her own, but in many ways, she raised hundreds. Not in the traditional sense, but through music, through discipline, through the quiet kindness of someone who showed up every single day. Some of her students went on to become musicians. Others forgot everything they learned the minute they left. But almost all of them remembered her. She had a kind of presence that lingered. Years later, her students still recalled the smell of her house, lavender and paper, the sound of the old wooden clock ticking, the way her pencil tapped the edge of the music stand when they lost rhythm. The lessons weren't just about piano. They were about focus, about respect, about listening. Her own story was less talked about. She'd been a gifted player in her youth. There were rumors of scholarships, of opportunities she turned down to stay close to home. Her parents got sick. Or maybe she just didn't want the spotlight. No one really knew. She never brought it up. People assumed she was content, and maybe she was. Every few years, someone would offer to replace her piano, donate a newer one, something digital with more features. She always refused. "This one's fine," she'd say, running her fingers over the keys like they were familiar friends. The ivory was chipped in places. A few of the keys stuck when it rained. But to her, it still held its tune. That was enough. By the time she turned 72, her hands had started to slow. The arthritis crept in little by little, and opening jars or folding laundry became a bit more effort. But she never missed a lesson. She still walked to the front door and greeted each student with the same soft voice, still poured lemonade for the parents who waited in their cars, still played the first few bars to help them find their place. But that year, she made a quiet announcement. "This will be my final season," she told the parents and students. "I'll be retiring after the summer." There wasn't a big fuss. A few parents brought flowers. Some of the older students hugged her tightly. Most just said thank you and moved on. After all, she had taught generations. She had earned her rest. She didn't expect anything unusual. She simply looked forward to a slower pace, maybe reading more, maybe traveling if her health allowed. She didn't know yet that her final student, her very last one, was going to change everything. Mrs. Adler never kept track of how many students she taught. There were too many names, Too many little faces that grew up and disappeared into the world. Some stayed in town and became familiar adults she waved to at the grocery store. Others moved away and only showed up in the local paper when they got married or had kids of their own. But she remembered moments more than names. A girl who cried during her first recital and then nailed her second. A boy who couldn't sit still until he played jazz. A quiet teenager who brought her flowers on Christmas every year for 5 years straight. She never saw herself as special, just consistent. Music was her rhythm, and teaching gave it shape. She started right after college. It wasn't the plan at first. She thought she'd perform, maybe travel, but then her father got sick, and she came home to help. Teaching was supposed to be temporary, but it grew on her. Not the paperwork, not the scheduling, but the moments. When a student finally got a piece right, when a parent sat with eyes wide as their child played something beautiful they never thought possible. She saw it over and over again. The first lesson was always a mix of nerves and awkward smiles. Some kids sat too straight. Others slouched until their heads nearly hit the keys. Parents waited in the hallway, pretending not to listen while leaning just a little too close to the door. She always started the same way. "This is middle C," she'd say, pointing gently. "Everything else comes from here." The room hadn't changed much in 5 decades. The same patterned rug, the same bookshelf filled with theory books and faded recital programs, a small lamp on the corner table that flickered if you bumped it too hard. The piano itself, her first and only, had been a gift from her uncle when she was just 17. It was scratched, a little uneven in tone, but it still had warmth. What mattered most was how students felt in that room. Safe. Heard. Parents trusted her, even the ones who didn't believe their kids had talent. They said things like, "Just teach him the basics," or, "We're not expecting much." She always nodded politely and went on to teach their child like they were capable of anything. Not because she believed everyone would be a star, but because she knew that effort deserved attention. The years stacked up. Her hair turned gray, then white. Her posture softened. She started wearing thicker sweaters in winter, even when the heater worked fine. But she never stopped caring. Never stopped believing that music could change something in a person. She remembered when one of her former students got married and asked her to play the processional. She hadn't performed in years. Her hands shook a little. But the moment she touched the keys, the muscle memory came back. The bride cried. So did she. She remembered a student who lost her father in a car accident and didn't speak for weeks. But she still came to her lessons. Just sat there, silent, while Mrs. Adler played for her. One day the girl reached over and played a single note. Then another. Eventually she played again. That's what teaching had always been to her. Not just scales and practice logs, but connection. Quiet, powerful, and sometimes invisible to everyone else. When she told people she was retiring, most just said, "You've earned it." And she had. But in private, she felt something heavier. She wasn't sure who she was without it. Her days would be quieter. No more pencils tucked behind her ear. No more recitals in spring. No more watching little fingers learn something new. She told herself it was time. Her joints ached more than before. She got tired easier. Her doctor gently hinted she should take things slower. So she listened. She set a date. June 15th would be her final lesson. She even considered taking a photo with her last student, just for memory's sake. She didn't know yet who that student would be. She assumed it'd be one of the regulars. A neighbor's kid, maybe. Someone passing through. She had no idea that the final name on her schedule was about to become the one she'd remember most. His name was Leo. She noticed it right away on her schedule. New name, unfamiliar last name, and an address from the edge of town where she didn't know many families. His lesson had been booked through email by his mother, who kept the message short. Leo is interested in piano. He's never played before. He's quiet but curious. Thank you. When the day came, she didn't expect much. Most beginners came in unsure, distracted, or just there because their parents insisted. It was rare to find a true first-timer who wanted to be there. Still, she made the room ready like she always did. Dust off the keys, open the windows a bit, put the metronome in its usual spot. At 3:55 p.m., she heard a soft knock on the door. She opened it to find a small, thin boy with messy hair and a hoodie pulled halfway over his face. He was holding a plastic water bottle and glancing around like he wasn't sure if he was in the right place. His mother stood a few feet behind him, arms crossed, offering a polite smile. "You must be Leo," Mrs. Adler said. He nodded without looking up. She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, taking in the room like it was heavier than he expected. Some kids were eager to touch the piano right away. Not Leo. He just stood by the edge of the rug and waited. "You can sit there," she said, motioning to the bench. He sat, kept his hands in his lap. She sat beside him and opened a beginner's book, flipping past the table of contents. She usually started with posture, hand shape, finger numbers. But with Leo, something told her to wait. "Have you played before?" He shook his head. Still no eye contact. "Do you want to?" After a pause, he whispered, "Yes." That was enough. She placed his right hand gently on the keys, showing him where middle C was. "This is where we start," she said. "Everything builds from here." For the next 30 minutes, they stayed in that small world of black and white keys. She didn't push too hard. Just simple exercises, finger movements, a few notes to feel the shape of the keyboard. Leo didn't speak much, but he listened. Really listened. Some kids asked a lot of questions. Others fidgeted or tried to play with both hands too soon. Leo just watched her hands, then tried to copy the movement as exactly as he could. She noticed it by the end of the first lesson. He had something. Not talent in the flashy sense, not speed or brilliance, but focus, intent. The way he placed each finger was careful, deliberate, like he respected the keys. That wasn't common. When the lesson ended, she told his mother he did well. The mother smiled and said thank you, then added quietly, "He doesn't usually like new places." Mrs. Adler nodded. "He's welcome here." After they left, she sat alone for a moment. The room was quiet again, but something felt different. She looked at the piano. At 72 years old, after thousands of lessons, she thought she'd seen everything. But Leo had a presence that stayed with her, even after the door had closed. There was something in the way he listened, not just to her words, but to the silence between them. She didn't know anything about his background, didn't know why he barely spoke or why his mother seemed tired. But she knew this. He was the kind of student who could go somewhere, if someone took the time. She hadn't planned to invest deeply in another student. Not this late. Not with retirement weeks away. But when she picked up her notebook to make a few lesson notes, she wrote something she hadn't written in years. "Watch this one closely." And from that moment on, Leo wasn't just her final student. He became the one she looked forward to. By the third lesson, she realized Leo didn't need things explained twice. Most students had to be reminded of the same instructions over and over. Don't slump your shoulders, curve your fingers, slow down. Leo absorbed everything on the first try. If she made a correction, he'd nod once, then adjust without being told again. He didn't ask many questions, but when he did, they were never shallow. One afternoon, she was showing him a simple piece in C major. He looked down at the notes, then turned to her and said, "Why does it sound different when you play it?" She looked at him for a second, surprised. "Because I've been playing for a long time," she said gently. "My hands know the weight of the keys, and I play with feeling." He nodded, but not in the way someone nods to end a conversation, more like he was taking it and storing it somewhere. She started to realize their lessons were becoming different from the others. It wasn't just about songs and scales anymore. He lingered after class, sometimes just a few minutes, enough to look around the room and ask little questions about things most students ignored. "Why do you keep this clock if it doesn't work?" he asked one day. "It used to belong to my mother," she replied. "It stopped ticking the week she died. I never fixed it." He didn't say anything to that, just stared at the clock, then looked back at the keys. There was a weight to him, not heavy like sadness, but deep, like someone who already knew life could be complicated. He didn't talk about school, didn't mention friends, but there was a stillness in him that felt older than his age. She caught herself checking her calendar every week to see when his lesson was. It became the 1 hour she didn't want to miss. She also noticed something else. He practiced. Not just the assigned pieces. He experimented. She could tell by the way he'd ask about chords not in his book, or try out patterns that weren't written anywhere. Most students did only what was required. Leo came back each time with more than she expected. One day she found him already sitting at the piano when she walked in. His mother had dropped him off early, and instead of waiting outside, he'd let himself in. "I hope you don't mind," he said quietly. "Not at all," she replied. She listened as he played something unfamiliar. The notes were simple, but they weren't from any beginner's book. "Did you make that up?" she asked. He nodded. "I tried to copy the feeling from something you played last time." She didn't know what to say at first. Most students copied notes. He was trying to copy feeling. That was different. As the weeks went on, the room felt more alive during his lessons. She found herself pulling out old pieces she hadn't used in years, ones that demanded emotion, not just skill. He didn't always get them right, but he understood them. Sometimes she wondered if he reminded her of someone, maybe herself when she was young, quiet, serious, always reaching for something that couldn't quite be explained. He never talked about what he wanted to be, never said, "I want to be a musician," or "I want to get good at this." But his eyes gave it away. Every time he sat at that piano, it was like he was trying to say something without using words, and she was listening. At night, after the house had settled into silence, she would sit in her chair and think about him, her final student. She had taught hundreds, maybe more, and most had become good enough. Some had become great. But this boy, this quiet, serious boy, was the first in a long time who made her wonder, what if this one changes everything? Leo's final lesson was on a Thursday afternoon. It was warmer than usual for June. The sun came in through the windows in long stripes, lighting up the old rug and the dust in the air. Mrs. Adler had opened the curtains all the way, as if she wanted to see every part of the room one more time while it was still hers. She had cleaned that morning, but not too much. She wanted the room to feel the way it always had, lived in, steady, comfortable. The metronome was in its usual place. The lesson books were stacked neatly, and the piano waited, quiet but ready. She looked at the clock. 3:58. At exactly 4 o'clock, Leo knocked. Same soft knock as always. She opened the door and smiled. Right on time. He stepped inside without saying much, like always. But he was holding something this time. A thin, flat object wrapped in brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. He held it carefully in both hands. She looked at it, curious, but didn't ask. Not yet. They started the lesson the same way they always did. A warm-up, a short review, then into a piece they'd been working on. He was playing Chopin, not a full piece, just a simplified version. But he played it like it mattered. Every note was thoughtful, quiet where it should be, stronger where it counted. When he finished, she didn't speak right away. She just looked at him. "You've learned more than most students do in a year," she said softly. "You listen. That's rare." He looked down at the keys, then back at her. "You helped me listen." It was the most personal thing he'd ever said in all their lessons. She didn't know how to respond, so she just nodded. That moment was enough. Then he stood up, took the wrapped package from the chair, and handed it to her. "I made this for you," he said. Or, found it. Then fixed it. She untied the twine slowly, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a frame, old, wooden, slightly chipped on one corner. But what was inside the frame made her pause. It was a sheet of music. Not a copy, not a printout. The real thing. Yellowed with age, but still clear. Handwritten notes in the margins. Her notes. She recognized it instantly. Debussy's Clair de Lune. Her favorite piece. The one she played on quiet mornings before her students arrived. The one she hadn't performed publicly in years. "Where did you get this?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "My mom said it was in a stack of old papers at the music shop. She bought it for $2. I saw your handwriting on the bottom corner." She looked closer. There it was. Faded pencil, in cursive. "Slow here. Let the moment breathe." He continued. "I cleaned the paper, then we framed it. I thought you should have it, since it's the last day." She didn't speak for a long time. Her eyes didn't leave the page. It wasn't the kind of gift a child usually gives. It was thoughtful in a way that reached beyond his age. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This means more than you know." He nodded, but didn't smile. Just sat down again at the bench. She placed the frame carefully on the windowsill, where the light hit it. They didn't play any more music that day. They just sat for a while. No talking, no plans, just the quiet between them, the same quiet he had always listened to so well. When his mother pulled up outside, he stood slowly. "Will you still play after this?" he asked. She gave him a soft smile. "Maybe, but I'll miss teaching." He hesitated for a second, then said, "You're the best teacher I ever had." And with that, he turned and left. She watched from the doorway as he walked down the steps and got into the car. He didn't look back, but he didn't have to. She stood there for a long time, holding the empty doorknob in her hand, the framed music glowing behind her in the evening sun. She thought that was the end. She had no idea Leo wasn't finished, not even close. The first Thursday without a piano lesson felt strange. Mrs. Adler still woke up early, still made her tea, still sat by the front window like she always did. But the house was too quiet. There was no stack of books to prepare, no lesson notes to review, no sound of footsteps approaching the porch at 4:00 p.m. sharp. She had spent more than 50 years following the same rhythm. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't loud, but it had shaped her life. Teaching piano had given her purpose, structure, a reason to keep moving, even when the days felt long or lonely. Now the room felt still. The piano sat untouched. The metronome hadn't ticked in days. The framed music Leo gave her rested on the windowsill, catching the light in the late afternoons. She looked at it often. Sometimes she even traced her own handwriting in the corner, as if to remind herself that she'd once taught, once played, once mattered in the lives of others. She had told herself retirement would be peaceful, that she'd catch up on books, maybe travel a bit if her body allowed. But the truth was, she wasn't ready for the silence. It wasn't that she wanted a crowd. She didn't need a party or applause or even acknowledgement. She just missed the small things, how students laughed when they hit the wrong key, how the room buzzed with tiny frustrations and tiny victories. She missed the feeling of passing something on. And she missed Leo. He had been different from the rest, not just because of his quiet focus or the way he played, but because he had seen her, not just as a teacher, but as a person. Most students came and went. She cared for them, yes, but there was a wall, a polite distance. With Leo, the wall had slowly lowered without either of them saying so. She didn't know much about his life. He never volunteered details, and she never pried. But the way he listened said enough. He understood things she never had to explain. Now that he was gone, she wondered if she'd imagined it. Maybe it was just her being sentimental. Maybe she had read too much into it. The following week, she thought about calling his mother, just to say thank you again, just to see how he was doing. But she didn't. She didn't want to intrude. Their time was finished. She had always believed in clean endings. Still, every Thursday she found herself glancing at the clock at exactly 4 o'clock. She didn't tell anyone about the emptiness. Not her neighbor, not the pharmacist who always asked how retirement was going. She smiled, nodded, said it was nice to have free time. But inside, she missed the sound of music filling the corners of her house. One morning, she considered playing again, just for herself. She sat down at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and tried to begin Clair de Lune. But her fingers didn't move the way they used to. The rhythm escaped her. The flow wasn't there. She stopped halfway through and closed the lid gently. Maybe she wasn't supposed to play anymore. Maybe her part was over. So she started filling her days with other things. She went to the market more often, walked slower, took naps in the afternoon, and every time she passed the piano room, she looked away just a little. She told herself it was enough to have taught, that those years mattered, that the notes played by other hands would keep echoing somewhere, even if she never heard them again. But there was still something unfinished, something quiet and waiting, like the pause before the next line of a song. She didn't know it yet, but Leo hadn't moved on. He hadn't forgotten. And the silence in her house was about to be broken in a way she never expected. 2 months passed. Summer turned to early fall. The leaves outside Mrs. Adler's window began to shift from green to amber, and the days felt shorter, even though the hours passed just as slowly. She had fallen into a new kind of routine, one that didn't involve lesson plans or warm-ups or the quiet clink of a metronome. She took morning walks, baked more than she could eat, and spent long afternoons reading the same pages twice. She didn't talk much about teaching anymore. Most people assumed she was enjoying retirement, and she didn't feel the need to correct them. But some days, she caught herself listening for sounds that wouldn't come. Footsteps on the porch, a car door shutting at 3:59, the hesitant voice of a student saying, "Should I start from the top?" She missed all of it, but she didn't say so out loud. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived. There was nothing special about it on the outside. No return address, just her name written in careful cursive. The paper was thick, the kind used for invitations. She turned it over, slid a letter opener along the seam, and pulled out a single sheet of cardstock. It was an invitation, a music recital, local venue, Saturday night. Her eyes scanned the details slowly, not quite understanding what she was reading, until she saw it. Performing. Leo Ames. She froze. The name sat there on the page, simple and unassuming, but it lit something in her. She read it again to make sure. Then again. She hadn't spoken to Leo since the day he gave her the framed sheet music. She hadn't expected to. There was a second slip of paper tucked inside. A single ticket. She looked at it for a long time. That night, she left the invitation on her kitchen table and made herself a quiet dinner. She didn't touch the piano. She didn't play music. She just sat, wondering. Was this something she was meant to attend? Or was it just a courtesy? A polite gesture? Nothing more? By morning, she had made her decision. She would go. Not for the performance. Not even for the music. But for the boy who had once listened to her more deeply than anyone else ever had. Saturday came quickly. She dressed in her best sweater, pulled a soft scarf over her shoulders, and arrived 15 minutes early. The venue wasn't what she expected. It wasn't a school auditorium or a church hall. It was smaller, intimate, more like a converted bookstore than a performance space. She stepped inside and found a seat near the back. The lights were low, and soft music played through the speakers. People filed in slowly. Most of them looked unfamiliar. Parents, students, a few musicians carrying instrument cases. She clutched the program in her lap, scanning the lineup. There were 5 performers total. Leo was last. She didn't see him anywhere. Not backstage, not in the seats. He wasn't near the entrance. But somehow, she knew he was there. The first few performers played well. Some were stiff, others more relaxed. The audience clapped politely. And then the MC stepped onto the small stage and cleared his throat. "Our final performer this evening is a young composer and pianist," he said. "He's new to the stage, but not to the music. Please welcome Leo Ames." Mrs. Adler felt her breath catch. He walked out from the side, wearing a simple black shirt and jeans. No jacket, no fancy posture. Just Leo, as she remembered him. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just sat at the piano, centered himself, and paused. Then he began to play. And the moment his hands touched the keys, she knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary performance. The first note was soft, barely there. Mrs. Adler leaned forward slightly in her seat, instinctively holding her breath. She recognized the opening chord. Not immediately, but somewhere in her memory, it rang familiar. The melody that followed was delicate and restrained, yet full. It had structure, but also something more. Emotion. It wasn't from any beginner's book, not a simplified version of a famous piece. This was something different, personal. Leo's posture hadn't changed since she last saw him. Shoulders slightly rounded, elbows relaxed. But his hands moved like he wasn't thinking about them anymore, like they had become their own voice. The piece started with a gentle progression, soft dynamics that swelled only slightly before pulling back again. She could feel the restraint, the tension between what was said and what was held in. Every pause felt intentional. Every chord fell exactly where it should. And then the melody returned. Stronger, clearer. That's when she realized. He had taken her favorite piece, the one he'd framed for her, and reimagined it. Not a cover, not a mimic, a transformation. It was Clair de Lune, but it wasn't. The foundation was there, woven into the middle of the piece like a heartbeat. But he had built something new around it, his own interpretation, his own rhythm. And somehow, through the notes, he was speaking to her. Every shift in tone felt familiar. Every rise and fall mirrored something she remembered from their lessons. The way he listened, the questions he asked, the silences they shared. She wasn't just hearing a composition. She was hearing their time together, turned into music. A quiet tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't move to wipe it away. Around her, the room was still. No one whispered. No one shuffled in their seat. Everyone was listening, drawn in by something they couldn't quite name. Then came the final passage. A slow return to stillness. The notes thinned out, one by one, until only a single key remained. He let it ring longer than expected. Just long enough. And then it ended. Leo didn't move right away. His hands rested on his lap. He looked down, not at the audience, not at the applause, just at the piano, like he was saying goodbye. Then he stood, turned toward the small crowd, and spoke. "My piece is called Adler," he said, voice calm, steady. "It's based on something I learned from the woman who taught me how to play. Not just music, but how to be quiet and how to listen. She gave me the space to find my sound. This is for her." Every head in the room turned instinctively toward the back, toward Mrs. Adler. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't used to being seen. Not like this. She simply placed her hand over her heart. Leo caught her eye. Just for a second. And in that moment, everything she had done, every hour, every correction, every small encouragement she'd given over the last 50 years, felt worth it. Not because she was honored, not because someone said her name out loud, but because something she gave had grown into something more. The applause came then, slow at first, then full. But she barely heard it. Her ears were still full of the music. She stayed seated long after the lights came up, long after people stood to leave. The invitation had said recital. But what she had just witnessed was something else entirely. It was a thank you, a message, a gift, and she would carry it with her for the rest of her life. The crowd had started to file out, soft voices returning to the room like light after a storm. Programs folded, chairs pushed back, jackets shrugged on. But Mrs. Adler didn't move. She sat still in her seat, hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the piano Leo had just walked away from. Her heart was full in a way she couldn't describe. Not the loud, overflowing kind of full, not the kind that bursts, the quiet kind, the kind that settles deep inside you and makes everything else feel still. She didn't expect him to come over, but he did. No big announcement, no rush, just Leo, walking down the narrow aisle of folding chairs like it was any other afternoon lesson. He stopped in front of her and stood for a moment, as if checking to see if it was okay to speak. She nodded before he said a word. "You came," he said. "I wouldn't have missed it," she replied. There was a short silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was full. "I didn't know if it would work," he admitted. "The piece. I tried to make it feel like what it felt like to be in your room, learning." She looked up at him, her eyes glassy. It did. Every part of it did. He looked down, as if unsure of what to say next, but she knew he didn't need to. He had already said everything through the music. People brushed past them, murmuring goodbyes, slipping out the door. The venue was almost empty now. A man was folding chairs near the wall, but Mrs. Adler stayed in her seat, and Leo stayed standing next to her, like neither of them wanted to mark the moment as over. "You called it Adler," she said quietly. He nodded. "I didn't know what else to call it. That room, those lessons, they changed everything for me. I didn't even know I liked music before I met you." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that carried more years than words. "You didn't just like it," she said. You understood it. That's rare. Leo sat down in the chair next to her finally. He didn't speak for a minute. He just looked at the stage where the piano still sat, lid open, keys catching the faint glow of the overhead lights. I'm going to keep writing, he said. Not just playing. I want to try to say things through music. Things I can't say out loud. She nodded. You should. Then he turned to her. Would it be okay if I visited sometime? Not for a lesson. Just to talk. Her throat caught for a moment, but she managed a quiet, of course. It was all she needed to hear. After he left, she sat for a few more minutes, watching the space slowly empty. Eventually, she rose and walked toward the door. Her steps were slower than they used to be, but lighter somehow. When she got home that night, she placed the invitation and the recital program on the small table next to the framed Claire de Lune sheet music. Then she sat at the piano bench. For the first time in weeks, she opened the lid, placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't play anything complicated, just a few chords, soft, barely more than a whisper. But they were enough. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It had been filled, not by noise, but by meaning, by a student who had listened, who had learned, who had taken everything she gave and turned it into something that would live on, far beyond her lessons. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was part of something that would continue, something beautiful. And in that moment, she finally understood. Her final student wasn't the end. He was the echo. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.